Let me. So I'm Heath Alexander. I'm the Senior Director of Grants and Evaluation at Study Smart Tutors. I'll be the presenter for today. I have a long history in TRIO programs. I was a participant in Talent Search when I was in high school. I became a summer camp counselor for Upward Bound and eventually director of Upward Bound for several years. And then I also spent the better part of a decade here in Washington, D.C., working at the Council for Opportunity in Education, or COE, and I worked on the government relations team as well as helping put on some of the grant proposal writing workshops and things like that at COE. The last decade or so has been spent just me helping institutions and organizations write federal grants, TRIO, Gear Up, Title III, Title V, and also doing compliance training and evaluation. I joined Study Smart Tutors in 2020, so it's been over 5 years. Over the course of my grant writing career, we're getting close to into almost $1 billion of federally funded grants. I think we're somewhere close to like $750 million in that 10-year, 11-year time period. So a long history in helping, manage these grants, write these grants. And so that's kind of where my expertise comes from with this presentation. This particular workshop was designed with new professionals in mind, new directors, or people who are, taking over the directorship for the first time. Maybe they've worked in TRIO, but you were not in charge or a part of writing the grant. So it is kind of a high level, talent search 101 kind of session. It doesn't mean that if you've been in TRIO or you've even written your grants that you won't get anything out of it. It just means that we're not going to go super deep into any individual sections. It is a 1 hour workshop, and it is meant to be sort of a high level, get people started, hopefully make people feel, calm about, starting to work on these grants and feel like, empower you to feel like you can do it. So kind of a motivational session, if you will. Feel free to ask questions in the comment section or the chat box. And also, again, you can unmute yourself and you can talk as well. Please ask questions. It will help the rest of the group. I do have a slide deck, but we can go off topic anytime as well. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going with the actual formal part of this. Just a quick check. Can you all let me know if you can see my screen, my slide deck? Okay, excellent. So, introduction of presenter. Also, there's quite a lot of you in the room, so I don't want to go person by person, but if you don't mind putting in your chat box, just tell me what your position is, director, advisor, counselor, or admin, or maybe you work at an institution at admin level. And just tell me like how many years you've been working in TRIO programs. Just give a little information about who's in the room today. So that would be great. Go ahead and use the chat right now. I just want to kind of see everyone. I can see your name, so you don't have to put your name. Just tell me. Yeah, okay. 20 years, Sergio, you're getting old like me. Julie, first year in TRIO, great. Director, 18 years. Great. All right. So a mix of fairly new and some seasoned people. Okay, awesome. I did not mention this, but feel free to ask questions and answer them amongst yourselves too. Be great to have you all communicate with each other and get to know each other also. All right, so when I'm working with people and I probably get an email every day that says, "Hey, are we going to have a competition this year? If so, when do you think these grants will be due?" And it's a bit of a loaded question because, as you probably have been aware, this political climate has been somewhat chaotic and unpredictable this year. And so it's very difficult to predict exactly the specific date that they're going to be due, but I can kind of give you some context from history of when the last previous competitions have been. In a normal year, the Department of Ed will publish a draft RFP, and that draft is open for 30 days for a public comment period for people to comment on what they put in the draft to see if we can get them to change anything. Once that 30-day comment period is up, they then will move to get a final RFP released with a due date on it. That's what normally happens. In the past few competitions, they've been skipping this process and just announcing competitions out of thin air. And this has nothing to do with the current administration in the White House, because this also happened in the previous couple of years under the Biden administration as well. So it's not a political thing. The Department of Ed has just been circumventing this specific process, which they had done before. But even prior to that, when they were releasing a draft, those drafts were primarily just the grant application from 5 years prior with almost no changes to it. So it really didn't serve much of a help for us, except for it initially would signal that the final RFP is going to be coming soon. So the draft sort of gave us a heads up in a way. Lately, we've not had a heads up. In fact, last summer when the Student Support Services competition came out, it was announced in a surprise to everybody, including COE, and it was due July 15th. Clearly, we're past July 15th already, so we know it's not going to be due this summer. But you should be working on your grant narratives as if they can release this RFP at any time. Okay? RFP is just a request for proposals. That's what we call it in TRIO. It's sometimes called notice inviting applicants, or NIA. It can be called all kinds of things, but the general term we use in TRIO is RFP. I'm not sure where that even came from, but that's what we call it. So you should be working as if this could come out at any time and be due at any time. I'm not saying that to scare you in any way. I'm saying that to say that's the reality that we're living in, and you should be working towards that now. What does that look like? You should have your target schools signed on board already with a signed letter of some kind, or a signed, a written commitment to be in your grant application. You should already be getting commitments from your institution. You should be compiling your data that you need for your needs section and objectives that we're going to go over today. Those things should be in motion already. You can wait for the budget, because we don't know what the budget amount will be yet. We don't know what the competitive preference, but there's a lot of things we don't know. But you should definitely be lining these things up if you haven't started already. Happy to chat with you offline about that process as well. But the short of it is, we don't know when the due date is going to be. It could be any time, and you should be preparing now. There are some things that could continue to delay this competition coming out, though, on the other side of the coin, right? Which is, but the budget reconciliation is done. They're now moving into individual appropriations bills. The House and the Senate both have to pass their bills. They have to come together in a conference and iron out the respective bills for the two chambers. So that could, definitely delay things. Congress has been on recess. Why does all that matter? Well, the funding that goes into this competition is being determined now. Congress has to, the Congressional Budget Office has to sign off in this application, the Office of Management and Budget, the Secretary of Education. There's a lot of signatures that have to take place in order for an RFP to go out. And so the political process could continue to delay things. All right. It could be due as late as next February or even March. But I don't want to tell you that that's what I think the due date is going to be, because I don't want you to relax. I don't want you to take time off and say, well, the semester's starting, we'll put this off till later. Because we thought that was going to happen with Gear Up. We thought that was going to happen with SSS, and they released them early, and many people were not prepared. So I would much rather give you the advice to prepare now and assume that the grant will be due in November or December. And if you get additional time into February, January, February, or March, then that's just more time you have to work on things like your competitive priorities or your budgets or things like that. So, short answer is nobody really knows. Could be any time between like November and say March is what I think will likely happen. In the past, the due date was in February in 2016 and in 2021. And in 2021, I think the due date was something like February 26th, I want to say, like around that time, Bert. So it was even the end of February. But again, those are just historical reference points. That doesn't mean that's what's going to happen this time. We probably will have some kind of competitive preference priorities again, although we don't know what they're going to be. The secretary has published 3 priorities recently. Again, if anyone's interested in seeing those, I can email them to you separately, but the secretary has released 3 potential national priorities for education, but we don't know how they will drill into each of those 3 high-level priorities and if and which of those might be related to talent search and be inserted into this application. It's not worth worrying about that now until the RFP is released and we see what the language is going to be. They are not going to be the same priorities that you have now. They're not going to be the same priorities that Gear Up had to write last year. And that's because the competitive preference priorities come from the Secretary of Education. They will publish a list of national priorities for education, and they will pluck from those priorities and insert them into any grant. And this administration wants nothing to do with the previous administration, including the previous secretary's priorities. And so we can expect that the priorities, if there are going to be any, will be different than what we've seen in the past 5 years. All right. Well, the question I get then is, well, how can we start writing our grant right now if we don't have the RFP, if we don't know what the due date is? And the reason that we can start now, and you should start now, is that the selection criteria that outlines your grant narrative come directly from the federal regulations. We know at the very minimum that what will go into your narrative is already included in regulation. Now, can they add more to your narratives? Yes, but they cannot take away what's in federal regulation. And so I'm going to cite and take you to the federal regulations here. If you go to the talent search regs under 643.21, whoops, it's what selection criteria does the secretary use? 643.21. If you click on that, it will tell you that your need section is going to be worth 24 points, and it's going to have all of this information starting here down all the way to here. So we know that your need section will look like this already, that it's going to have this information in there. We know that your objectives will be related to these topics. We don't know the exact language for each objective, but we know they'll be related to these and so on. Your plan of operation is here, right? So we know this will be in your narrative. If you're an existing grantee, right, meaning you have a grant right now that you're working on, that means that your narrative was funded last time in 2021, that competition. The structure of that grant narrative will largely be the same as this one. So no matter what anyone tells you, you may use your old grant narrative as a foundational starting point or a draft for this competition because the skeleton structure of it's the same, because those selection criteria are in regulation. You'll need to put new data, you'll need to put new dates, you'll need to write new objectives, you'll need to have a new budget, your staffing may have changed, the way you provide service may be different, right? A lot of stuff will likely have changed over the last 4 years, but the structure is the same. And so you can use that narrative as a draft for your previous one. I don't recommend just dusting it off, so to speak, and just plucking in new data or plopping in new data and putting in a new budget and turning it back in. I don't recommend that. But I do recommend not starting from scratch, using it as a draft, using it as the structure and then adding to it any kind of new stuff that gets added. Okay, that's my advice. I've been doing that for over 10 years. Um, I have a 100% success rate of getting existing grant applications refunded again with your prior experience points. We've never lost a grant, um, and all the grants that we've worked on being renewed, and that includes hundreds of them, as I mentioned, like over 750 million in funded grants. So, and that's the process we always use. So I can attest you definitely can do that. In the chat box, can you all, just a quick poll question, how many talent search grants can each institution write for? What's the limit to how many you can write? The seasoned people are waiting for the new people to guess so they don't give away the answer. And the new people are waiting for the seasoned people to tell them so they don't get it wrong. Someone put in the chat, how many you think you can apply for? Is there a limit? One plus? Yeah. Okay. The regulations say that you can write for, it doesn't give you a limit. It just says you can apply for multiple awards as long as you're serving a different target area, different target population, different target schools. So you can't write for two grants in the same schools or two grants in the same target area. So if you are going to write a second or third or however many grants you want to write, it is unlimited. You must serve a different target area and different target schools. Okay. Kind of a trick question. You can write as many as you want, basically, or as many as your geographic location and student population as can fit into a program. Now, one question that I get is, well, how many students do you think we need to have in our schools in order to, meet the needs of a talent search grant? And I always say a rule of thumb is like a 5-to-1 ratio, meaning if you need 500 participants, you probably want about 2,500 students to choose from. Um, it's very hard to recruit these days. It's very hard to meet numbers in these programs that have high student counts like EOC or Talent Search. Upper bound's a little different with 60 students or 60 to 100, but with Talent Search being 500 to some people have 1,000 students that they have to recruit, you need a pretty large pool of possible students that make up your target schools, right? You want to have schools that have a high percentage of free and reduced lunch because you're going to need 2/3 of your 500 or more students need to be first gen and low income. Now, yeah, over 2,400 students. Yeah. How many programs, Kelly? Or is it a statewide talent search or something? Three. Yeah, three talent search. So the 5-to-1, again, it's just a rule of thumb. It doesn't mean that it can't work in other scenarios, but if you only have 600 or 700 students to choose from and you got to serve 500, you're going to have some kind of relationship with the schools that allow you to serve basically every student in the school in order to meet your numbers. And you still need to make sure and verify eligibility. So it gets pretty challenging. And so in deciding to write more than one grant or more than two or more than three, you really want to assess the student population that you have access to in order to ensure that when and if you are funded, you'll have enough students to recruit for your student population. It's great to get new grants. It's not great to get a new grant and then not be able to execute on it and losing it after a year or two because you can't meet your numbers and that kind of thing. So again, happy to help with these sort of things as well offline. Who's eligible to participate apply for talent search? Institutions of higher ed, secondary schools, nonprofit, nonprofit agencies or orgs, or a combination. You could have a partnership between any two or three of these groups to write a talent search combined, together. The selection criteria, I already kind of started going over some of it by showing you the regulatory language, but basically every TRIO grant will follow this similar pattern, including talent search. You'll have a need section. the need section, we're going to go over each of these sections today, but need, objectives, your plan of operation, your applicant community support, your quality of personnel, your budget, and your evaluation. And then at some point, you're likely to have some kind of either quality or project design, or your competitive preference priorities may be a quality of project design, which would require some kind of logic model or some kind of, well, yeah, it'll be a logic model. They've been having those in all the grants recently. So, I would start looking at models for logic models that you want to put in, because that's likely going to happen somewhere, either in your plan of operation, your evaluation, your CPPs, or they could add a new section called quality of project design. And then likely some kind of competitive preference priorities. There could be some absolute priorities. There could be invitational priorities. I did not put those on here as number 10 and 11, but an absolute priority is something that every program must do, and you don't get points for it. It is a requirement. An invitational priority is something that you don't get points for, and they say it's optional. They're inviting you to add some priorities to your grant. And then competitive preference priorities, you do get points for, but they are not required, or at least the RFP says they're not required. But because there are points attached to them, they essentially are required, or you're going to be less competitive than everyone else in the competition. So even if you see these as optional competitive priorities, they're really not optional. You don't want to go into the competition already down 8 points or 10 points or however many points these priorities could be. And so don't read their optional as optional. Read it as you have to do them. The only ones that are optional would be invitational priorities. All right. Any questions about any of that before I go in deeper into each section? All right, pretty straightforward, I think. The need section, if you saw from that quick view I gave you of the regulations, there are 6 subsections of need. The need section is where you begin to identify data from your target schools and your target area that tells the reader a story that your application signifies that you need this grant to help these schools and these communities, right? So this is the data portion of your grant. This is where you convince them that you've got it bad, right? Your schools are underperforming. Your community is in poverty. Your community has a low percentage of people with degrees, right? This is where you don't put your best foot forward here. You put the worst data, right? You say, hey, we really need these funds because otherwise these schools are failing. These kids are not going to college. They're not graduating at high rates, right? So the need section is where you tell the story with numbers that you really need this grant, right? You want to make them feel bad for your community and for your schools to the extent possible, right? Within these 6 subsections they want you to talk about that there are low-income families in your target area. You can use poverty rates. You can use percentage of low-income families through census. You can use free and reduced lunch rates. Most people will use a combination of those things, but the selection criteria will tell you exactly how you need to list these. Number 2, they want you to talk about the low persistence rates of your students in your schools. I will say in this one, retention rates do not suffice for persistence. So you're going to have to calculate an actual persistence rate and call it that in your narrative. And I'll go back to this regulatory language real quick so I can show you what I'm talking about. It says here, point number 2, low rates of high school persistence among individuals in the target schools, as evidenced by the annual student persistence rates of the target schools for the most recent year available. While many schools don't actually produce persistence rates, or there's not an actual annual student persistence rate quantified, you'll have to use some raw data from your schools to calculate it yourself if they don't have one. But I have seen readers deduct points for calling it retention rates. And the objective is secondary school persistence. So you need to align your persistence data in your needs section with the persistence objective. Again, for some readers, retention interchangeably with persistence will pass by, but for most readers, they're going to deduct a point if you don't actually call it persistence. Now, if you get a retention rate, you calculate a rate, it looks like retention or persistence is the same thing at your schools, right? There's no difference between the two for you and your schools. Call it persistence on your application. Just don't call it retention. Otherwise, you're probably going to lose points there, okay? I've seen that deducted multiple times. You need to put the four-year graduation rates of your school, and this is students graduating with a regular secondary school diploma in the standard number of years. So it has to be a regular secondary school diploma, which would allow them to graduate with whatever state requirement, and it has to be in 4 years, so a standard number of years, they say. You also want to talk about the low enrollment rates of the students in your school, the low college enrollment rates, and the low college completion rates of your community. Now, I know that most high schools are not tracking college completion rates of their high school graduates because they're not tracking kids for 6 years, or maybe they're not using Student Clearinghouse to do any reporting on that. Some schools will, but most schools don't. And so what we're going to use for college completion rate is the census data on the percentage of adults 24 years and older that have a degree. That's going to be your baseline for your objective. So we'll put that in there. Lack of rigorous curriculum in the school. So that could be lack of, I know in California they have something called A through G requirements. In other states they have some similar stuff. It could be AP courses, IB courses. It could be a specific list of courses that are required to be considered rigor in a state based on a state definition. The federal regulations actually give us 6 different definitions of what rigorous curriculum means. So if you go to your regulations, to the table of contents, you'll see what definitions apply under 643.7, and you'll be able to find what rigorous curriculum stands for in here. See, rigorous secondary school program of study means a study that is, and they go on to give you 6 different definitions here. So the key to this is first saying that there's a lack of rigorous curriculum in the schools and a lack of support for students in taking those courses, meaning there's no tutoring for them to take more rigorous courses, so they fail at higher rates, or there are no AP courses or honors courses, or you want to talk about that there's a lack of these things and a lack of support for students who are taking those, and then to try to create some data around the percentage of students who graduate having completed a rigorous secondary school program of study. Now, in tying this need data to your objectives, it's very important that whatever you choose as your definition for rigorous curriculum data in the need section is going to be your definition to measure your objectives for the next 5 years, okay? I've seen people put a different definition of rigorous curriculum in their need, but then they measure it with their students in a different way. That can get you in trouble if you're audited and those kind of things. So whatever definition, if you use AP in your need section and say, well, there's no AP classes, or they're not passing them, or they're not passing the test with a 3 or better, then that becomes your measurement for meeting that objective for the next 5 years of your grant. Okay, so please make sure there's alignment between the need and the objective section. And then the last thing is low academic achievement. You can put all sorts of things here: GPA, test score, student to counselor ratios, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can put in this section, but just make sure that it aligns with your objectives as well, so that you have baselines for each objective. We're going to talk about that in a second as well, but you always want to be aligning your data here with your exact objectives. So tips and tricks here: you're going to use this baseline data for your objectives, and you're going to use it as an outline for how you're going to build your plan of operation. So if you say something's a problem in your needs section, you should be prepared to address that problem in your plan of operation. So you need to link those 3 sections together. Use recent data and include comparison data. Really, really important. You must have comparison data for each data point. You can compare it to local, you can compare it to state, you can compare it to national, you can compare it to another local district, You can compare it to different schools within a district that are being served and not. You can compare low income versus non-low income in the same schools, if that's the best you can do. There's a lot of different comparisons that you can make with your data. Just make sure that your comparison data is outperforming your target school data. You can't say your target schools have an 85% graduation rate and your state has an 80% graduation rate. You're going to get deducted points because your schools are outperforming the state data in that scenario. That's why you should not just decide, I'm going to use any comparison data without first comparing it to your target schools. Do not put comparison data that's lower than your target school data or worse than your target school data. That's a sure way to not show need and a sure way to get points deducted. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Your comparison has to look better than your target schools or you will lose points. All right. Use tables, charts, graphs, and then explain them. All right, so that's your need section. Any questions on the need? This is the most important part of your grant, by the way. I know it's first, but it's also the most important. If you don't get this data right, you very likely will also lose points on your objectives as well, because the data from this is used for your objectives. So this is so important. If you have any questions, please ask them now about the need section. Again, you can unmute yourself if you want. Did I do such a good job? There are no questions? I'll take that. That's fine. All right. If you do have questions, you can also save them to the end as well. But feel free to stop me at any time. So what I like to do in my needs section is create tables like this. This could be a summary table at the end of your needs section that summarizes all your data points for your objectives, or this could just be a large example of how each individual table should look. But when you're representing data for your target schools, eligible, non-eligible, or your comparison groups here, I always label that data set as the baseline for my future objectives, right? So when I'm putting graduation rates, I'm going to label this is the baseline for my objective B. Okay. The reason for this is you want to be very clear for yourself and for the reader what baseline numbers you're using to create your objectives. And if you label them here, it becomes less blurry for the reader, and also reminds you when you start to write your objectives that on this table, you've outlined what your baseline is. You also want to put the source of your data here. And the Department of Ed does not want you to use data that's more than 3 years old, but they want the most recent data available. So if you're writing your grant now and the data for the 24-25 school year is not yet available because they haven't compiled it and published it yet, go ahead and use 23-24. Okay, if 24-25 is not available. So that's fine. As long as it's not more than 3 years old, and as long as you can say it's the most recent data available to you. If some data points are available for 24-25, but others are not, same example, use 23-24 so you can get an entire data set that's comparable. All right. Also, do not use your current or past participant talent search data. Okay. Do not put in your APR data anywhere in your narrative, because they're going to then compare your future objectives in relation to your past objectives and your past performance. You don't want them to do that. You only want them to compare the current data of your target schools with what you proposed to improve upon to a future objectives. So do not include past participant data anywhere. Jeff has a question here. Last application, we cited free and reduced lunch stats, but now every student in the district receives free and reduced lunch and data is not kept. Can we just list info for each school titled economically disadvantaged? Yes, Jeff. In fact, a lot of this is a question I'm getting a lot because a lot of schools are just giving free lunch to everyone now. But let me go to the regulatory language so you can see what it's saying here. if you go to the selection criteria and you look at the needs section, it says, it only says a high number or high percentage of the following: low-income families residing in the target area, or students attending target schools who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So you don't have to include both. It's good for you to know the economically disadvantaged percentage because it tells you how many students in the school are likely to be eligible under the first-gen low-income, status. But it's not necessarily required because they put this or there. Most applications will put both because they just want to be complete and put as much as they can, but only one of these is required. And so I would put low-income families residing in the target area from the census and then use economically disadvantaged here instead of free and reduced lunch. That way you're covering at least this one and you should be able to still get all the points. So hopefully that answers your question. Did that answer, Jeff, did that answer okay? I want to make sure it's clear. Okay, awesome. All right. I'm going to move on to the needs section. You can get data from the census, state national reports and studies, school district data. Hopefully your institutional research office can help you. Hopefully your state has really robust data systems. However, some of this data is going to have to come directly from your target school's principals or counselors or data systems, because some data is not publicly available. In some states and some districts, they don't publish things like college enrollment rates, as an example. And so you're not going to be able to research that on your own. You're going to have to ask the school what percentage of their students went to college, and hopefully they have that data. So that's just one example. Calculating persistence rates. Sometimes we'll look at the enrollment projections over 4 years and do our own calculation. So if you can't find some data online, you're going to have to go to your school and talk to them and get it from them. That's why I urge you to start now. The objective section. In Talent Search, there are 5 objectives: persistence, graduation with having completed a rigorous course of study, college enrollment, and college completion. In order for your objectives to be counted, meaning you get points for them, they must be both ambitious and attainable simultaneously. Even if it's one or the other, you can't get any points. So an ambitious objective might be 100% graduation rate, right? That's ambitious. But the reader might not think that's attainable, because if only one student doesn't graduate, you don't get 100%. So even though that's ambitious, they don't see it as attainable. Therefore, it's not a good objective in their eyes. So you get 0 points for that. So you can see in that example that it's got to be both ambitious and attainable at the same time. You don't get partial credit for one or the other. How do they decide if it's ambitious or not? The baseline data that you've established up here, right? These baseline rates, your baseline is the rate at which your target schools are currently performing, right? The rate at which the graduation rate of your target schools is your baseline. Your objective must be higher than that baseline, because what you're saying to the reader is graduation rate of the target schools is 80%. We're going to spend $4,000 or $5,000 per student. They're going to have summer programs and tutoring and all this other stuff. We project our upper bound students are going to graduate at a higher rate than the target school's 80%. So you've got to propose an objective higher than the actual target school's baseline number. Hopefully I said that clear enough. Your baseline in your needs section becomes the number that you must exceed in your objectives. So if your target schools graduate at 80%, you want to propose an objective that's 87%, 90%, 92%, some number higher than 80. Nobody knows what that number is. Nobody knows what the readers are going to perceive as ambitious or attainable or not. There is no silver bullet answer for how you set your objective. What I do is I look at the baseline, I look at the comparison group, I look at your previous performance, and we try to find a number that sort of fits a fair line between all three of those. Higher than your baseline, somewhere around your comparison group number, but hopefully not higher than what you've previously performed, because you don't want an objective that is not attainable in real life either. So we try to look at those three numbers and come up with a really good number. We've been really successful at creating those objective percentages, but there's no perfect scenario. I think Angela's on here from UC Davis. If I remember right, in her grants, one of the readers said that, like a 10 percentage point increase was overly ambitious, that they didn't think we could meet that, right? But in her other grants, she got points for them using a similar model. So it kind of depends on the reader that you get. You're not really sure what they're going to think. So our rule of thumb is we try to go somewhere between like 7 to 12 percentage points higher than the baseline. Again, that's just a general rule of thumb. That doesn't mean every objective should be exactly 7 to 12. You know what I mean? You've got to figure out, a good number. The higher the baseline, the harder the objective is to write, because if your graduation rate of your target schools is 98% already, it's going to be very hard to set an objective at 99 or 100% and get full credit for that. The readers are going to say that you don't have need because the graduation rate is so high, and therefore it becomes hard to write an objective. It's also hard to write an objective if your baseline is really low. Let's say the college completion rate of your target area of adults 24 years and older is, 10%. Well, even going to 20% is a 100% increase over your baseline, right? From 10 to 20 is not 10%, it's a 100% increase, right? You're doubling the rate of completion. So don't take the 7 to 12 percentage points above the baseline as just a rule of thumb for every objective, but in any reasonable baseline from, say, like 35 to 85, like in that range, a good several to double digit percentage point increase is usually pretty okay. If you go 2-3 percentage points above the baseline, it's likely not going to be ambitious. And if you go 20, 30, 40 percentage points above the baseline, it's probably not going to be seen as attainable. So somewhere in the range of like 7 to 12, 15 percentage points above the baseline is usually what we see as safe. So that's what makes it ambitious. What makes it attainable? What makes it attainable is your plan of operation, the services that you provide, the qualified staff that you're going to employ, having a good budget, that will be able to pay for the services that you've outlined, and having support from your community, your schools, your institution. Those are the things that you talk about that makes each objective attainable. So to recap, there's one single data point that will make your objectives ambitious, and that is the baseline number. Do not throw several data points into your objective. Only give them the baseline number. You say, the baseline graduation rate from our target schools is 80%. We propose a 10 percentage point increase to 90%. That's what makes it ambitious. Don't throw 10 other data points in there. And then you say, what makes it attainable? Well, we're going to provide tutoring. We're going to do grade checks. We're going to look at their course schedules to make sure they're on track to taking the right graduation requirements, right? You're going to explain the kinds of services and other things that are going to lead to higher graduation rates. That's what makes it attainable. All right. That's how you write a good objective. When I was at COE, I helped lead the national appeal process for unsuccessful applicants. And while this is not empirical data, I can tell you probably 99% of those that did not get funded lost points on their objectives, simply because they did not follow this model of creating ambitious and attainable objectives. And in most cases, they lost points because the reader said, I can't tell what your baseline is. Therefore, I can't judge your objective because you didn't give me a baseline. You didn't tell me where the schools are starting at, and in order to determine if how you're going to improve is going to be ambitious or not. So have a baseline number, propose an objective higher than the baseline, and talk about the services you're going to provide in order to meet that objective. You should be fine here on your objective section. Any questions about this one? This is where most people lose points, and many people are surprised by that. wow, how can we lose points on the objective? We proposed a good objective, right? It has to be written in a specific way. Otherwise, the reader will just say, I can't judge your objective because you're not giving me the right information. Okay. I'll pause for a second here and just see if there are any questions about objectives. All right. Plan of operation. So I spent a lot more time on the need and objectives than I am these other sections because they're the most critical. Most of you can write your own plan of operation, your staffing plan, your budget. Those things are, most people will get the majority of those points. It's the need and objectives where most people lose. So I'm going to spend, that's why I spent so much time on them. The plan of operation, though, is the most points and has the most sections. The most important thing you can do here is to do what it says in number 1 and 2 on the pro tips here. Readers want an actual plan, not a statement. They want you to use things like who's going to do it, what are they going to do, how often or when, why are they doing it, meaning what objective does it help achieve. Each of the sections of your plan of operation should look like a plan, a step-by-step, do this, then that, then this. This is who's going to do it. This is when we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. Like, most people take for granted the word plan. The readers don't take for granted the word plan. They want to see step by step how to do something. And I think others in the community, COE and others, say your plan should be able to be executed by someone who doesn't work in your program, meaning they should be able to open your grant narrative and read through it and know how to run your program by how you described it in your plan of operation. All right. Don't take things or processes or things for granted because the readers don't all know what talent search is. They don't all know what you do. And so a lot of times I'll read someone's narrative and I'll say, well, in your recruiting model, you don't have a waiting list on here. Oh, yeah, we have a waiting list. Well, why didn't you put it there? Oh, we forgot about, we have it. We just didn't write it into our narrative. Right. So make sure you don't take things like that for granted, that you write actually what you want to do in your program. Another example is a scoring rubric for applicants who want to be in your program. Nowhere in regulation or law or an RFP does it tell you you have to have a scoring rubric, which is a more objective process in terms of helping recruit your students. So you got to have some kind of scoring rubric or you will get a deducted point. And so again, don't take things for granted. Make sure you're tying your services back to each objective, because in your objective section, you're going to be saying, to meet graduation requirements or persistence, we're going to provide tutoring, we're going to provide mentoring, right? You're saying that in your objective section. So make sure in your plan of operation, you're also, every service you provide, you should indicate which of the 5 objectives will that help accomplish. All right. So all these are in the pro tips there. Specifically for talent search, you need to make sure you read the RFP instructions on what you're allowed to do to track your participants. In the past, it provided a way in which you could randomize your graduates to decide which students you actually are tracking, so that you're not required to track every student, that you can track a subset of students based on a randomized sample. So check the RFP to make sure if that's going to continue or not. Make sure you know the right plan for tracking your participants. Again, it's in the application instructions. That's only for talent search because it's so many students. Oops. The next section, applicant and community support. The applicant is you, your institution. So you need to talk about what facilities, what equipment and supplies, the personnel that will be donating their time to your grant, like financial aid presentations or admissions or career assessments, things like that. So anything that your institution can provide. If your institution is providing any actual real money, you must have a plan for that in your grant that will last for 5 years. The readers in the department don't want you to try to load up money in your first year to make your application look good, and then that money's taken away the next year. So you should be able to definitively say in there that the money that's being allotted to you is going to be extending over the course of the entire 5-year cycle. Most institutions don't give money. Most of it's in kind facilities, equipment, supplies, and personnel and time and things like that. But if you do, just think about that. You must have written commitments from your partners. If you're an institution of higher ed, you need to have your community-based orgs and your schools give you written commitments. If you're a secondary school, you need the others to write letters and so on. So you should have written commitments on file in your office because you have to write a subsection in this portion of your narrative that talks about those commitments. You do not have to submit those letters with your application, but you're expected to have them on file in case of an audit. Okay. I recommend working on this section first along with your needs section. The reason I always tell every one of my partners or clients to work on this and the need first is because this requires you to get something from someone else, as does the need section, the data that you're trying to collect. Anytime you're waiting for something from someone else, like a signed letter or a commitment to something, you want to try to start working on that first. You don't want to be waiting for those things as your grant deadline becomes closer. You'd much rather have everything on hand so that it falls on you to get everything done, not someone else. That's why this section and the need, I think, are the most important to start with. Let me think what else here. Oh yeah, don't take anything for granted here. If you have something like a commitment from a partner, whether they get, the local grocery store gives free snacks for after school programs, anything, whatever you get, go ahead and put it in here. All right. I'm going to back up for 1 second on your plan of operation because I want to mention something that's been happening recently that's really critical. Under number 5, administration of the project, it's going to ask you for an organizational chart. It's going to ask you for how you plan to administer your program. It's going to talk about connections to other, programs on campus. This current administration is really cracking down on the DEI stuff. I know you all know this already. The offices that these programs report to could potentially cost you the grant if they're reporting to an office that looks like you're a DEI office. If you're reporting to the Office of Equity and Inclusion, you're reporting to the Office of Anti-Racism, Multicultural Affairs, like it can be dangerous for you to put an organizational chart that shows you reporting to those organizations. So I just want to put that out there because I saw it happen with SSS. And I think it's worth talking to your institution about if you fear that putting that information into this narrative and who your reporting structure may cost you this grant. I think it's worth having that conversation immediately just to make sure. Not trying to scare anyone, just trying to tell you the reality of what I'm seeing right now in the field with these grant narratives coming back. All right. I'm 100% sure that we lost some programs in this SSS competition simply because of where they were reporting. All right. I can't tell you the answer to what you should do. All I can say is it's worth a discussion on campus. It's likely many campuses are already renaming some of these offices simply because they don't want to lose funding in other areas too, not just TRIO, but other kinds of federal funds as well. So anyway, I just want to back up and say that. Quality of personnel. This should be your easiest section. Well, you'd be surprised how many points I see deducted here. These are minimum requirements for staff to hire someone new in these positions. These are not requirements of existing personnel that are already in place. You only want to put the minimum requirements to hire a new person. Because if you have a director that's been around for 30 years, they got a PhD, blah, 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 they've been in TRIO, they worked in TRIO for 25 years, don't put their qualifications because now if they retire or leave, you got to hire someone with those same qualifications because that's what you put in your narrative. Okay? These are minimum. Experience and training related to the project objectives. How many years of experience have each of these staff have in related kinds of services? Number 4, fields of study. I see a lot of people put 5 years of experience, blah, 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 but they say they need a bachelor's degree, but they don't put what they need a bachelor's or master's in, like counseling or social work or higher ed administration or education or something like that. You must put like 3 or so different fields of study down, or you will likely get a deduction. You can put things like education, counseling, social work, or other fields of other similar fields related to the program. Like you can give yourself some wiggle room by putting and other studies relate, other fields of study related if you want to, but don't leave that out because you'll get a deduction. And then the last part, which is they plan to employ someone who has overcome similar obstacles as participants. I'm interested to see when the RFP comes out if they're going to try to change this language at all, because this could be seen as DEI, but yet we still have to address it. And it's a plan to employ. It is not, we're going to advertise in the right place. We're going to give someone an opportunity to apply. It is actually a plan to find people and hire them who have overcome similar obstacles as your participants. Now, what those similar obstacles are could be left for interpretation, and maybe that's our wiggle room to write to this particular data point. But if you don't actually put a plan to employ the person, and I can give you some tips on that later, you could get a deduction for this part too. I've seen it happen many, many times. All right. So the tricks here: minimum requirements, experience and training, and fields of study, multiple fields of study, and plan to employ. If you follow this model, you should get all the points here. Your budget. Most of you are existing grantees. Most of you are going to get your GANs hopefully soon and are going to be asked to submit a revised budget based on your new grant award amount, your continuation amount. That's very likely going to be the same amount that you're going to be applying for in this grant. Not for sure, but very likely. Like it's a very high likelihood. So if you're being asked to submit a revised budget in relation to your new GAN, that will become your draft for the budget for this grant application. Okay, it's likely going to be similar or the same. All right, so we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. Most of the time, your budget needs to be approved by your budget office anyway, or your grants office or OSP office. So I don't need to spend a lot of time on your budget other than to say, when you get your GAN and you do a revised budget, write it in such a way that it kind of is your template for this new one. Okay. And then evaluation is the last section. Your evaluation has to be appropriate in relation to your project objectives. So how are you going to measure your project objectives in both qualitative and quantitative ways? And then how is your evaluation going to be both formative and summative? Summative is easy, the summary, right? The summative is the end result of each year, which is, did you meet your objectives? Did you fill out your APR? Those kind of things. Formative evaluation is where most people have issues. And formative evaluation is, how are you going to measure data throughout the year, right? During the academic year, to be able to assess whether or not you're on track to meeting your objectives or not. Instead of waiting to the end of the year to say, oh, sorry, we didn't meet them this year, or yay, we met them this year, you need to be checking in periodically throughout the year to say, yes, we're on track with this one. No, we're not on track with that one. We better do something different or we're not going to make it. That's what formative evaluation is meant to do, is to track your progress throughout the year instead of waiting till the end of the year. And then the disclosure of unintended outcomes. Again, using tables and charts and graphs. Make sure you're using the words qualitative and quantitative. Make sure you're using the terms formative and summative. And you should do well here as well and tie them all back to your objectives. All right. Odds and ends here. I know we're almost finished with our hour. The page limit in 2021 was 65 pages with formatting recommendations. it's likely going to be the same or similar. Maybe it'll be 50 or 60, but 65 is what we would expect. I put recommendations in quotations because one thing that happened in the previous Trump administration under Secretary Betsy DeVos was they inherited an upper bound competition where many upper bound programs were discontinued because of some formatting issues. And they did not want to take up that fight. And so Secretary DeVos and that administration said these will no longer be formatting requirements. They will now be formatting recommendations. That includes the page limit. That includes being double spaced or single spaced in text or tables or anything like that. Anything that's a formatting rule in the RFP is considered a recommendation, and you cannot lose points or lose your grant for not adhering to those recommendations. Am I telling you to not follow them? No, you should absolutely follow them, but don't make that the focal point of you preparing your narrative. The content is way more important than, oh man, should I single space this table or not, right? Those things are not going to cost you anything. I've helped over the last 5 years submit multiple grants that were well over the 65 pages. The competitive preference priorities were well over the allotted amount, and we still were funded. So I can tell you firsthand, they are absolutely recommendations. So don't stress yourself out about them. Just try to adhere to them as best you can. Don't go crazy. Don't submit a 100-page narrative. But don't stress out. In the past, we needed a one-page abstract that was single spaced. And in that, they ask you to include your objectives and your budget amount. And they ask you to indicate on the abstract that you were, in fact, going to address the competitive preference priorities. Those instructions will be in the RFP as well. You're asked to provide a table of contents that does not count against your page limit. There's a submission process outlined, including the due date. If you're working at a small institution that does not apply for many federal grants, you want to make sure that they have their SAM registration up to date. If they've applied for a grant in the last 12 months, it's already going to be up to date because they have to do it every year. If you and your institution need any help with the submission process, I'm happy to support there as well. And then there's a whole appeal process, which we can cover, at another time. But basically, you're told whether you can appeal or not. You don't just get to appeal because you don't like the decision. And the regulations outline the rules around the appeal process. All right. We are up on time, but these are some frequently asked questions I get. Does my need show enough need? Are these proper baselines? Are my objectives too high or too low? Do I consider past performance? I told you already not to, so that you know the answer to that one. Is my selection process appropriate? Meaning, do you have a scoring rubric and a waiting list? How long should my plan of operation be? How long should each section be? Can we exchange schools and keep prior experience? You can reduce schools or add new schools as long as you keep at least more than 50% of your existing schools to keep it the same grant and get your prior experience points. So again, we could talk offline about your exact situation if you want, but you can change your target schools in this grant if you want to. You can change your staffing. You can have a director less than 100%, but you need to write it in a specific way, which again, I can help you with. Changes after the grant's approved. Can you help with submission? So these are all the questions I normally get, and I'm happy to field them from you all as well. My email is heath@studysmarttutors.com. Please feel free to reach out to me if you need help. Certainly be happy to have you hire me as well as a consultant, but happy to answer just general questions for no fee as well. I'm going to give you a link to a survey, an evaluation to fill out. I would love if you could please evaluate this session and give me some feedback so I can make it better for the next group. And I will be sending out the recording as well as the slide deck as well. But I'm going to put this evaluation link in the chat box. Please click on and go ahead and fill that out quickly. And I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if there are any other pressing questions that didn't get asked. So thank you all for coming and, thanks for your attention. Any other last questions? either super quiet, shy group, or I just did such a great job of explaining. But yeah, again, happy to answer questions online or offline. Have a great rest of your week and good luck on your grant applications. We're here to help if you need it. Thank you all.